And thanks everyone so much for joining us for our MWEE Practitioner webinar series. We are excited to have you all here. Just a couple of logistics before we get started. If everybody could shut their video off now, that way we are going to be recording this and it will be posted online. That way no information will be shared there. The recording is posted on the Bay Program's YouTube page. I'll pop the link into the chat in a minute here. We have over 30 videos that are archived there, all about MWEEs. Oh, and you get to leave your video on if you want to, but no pressure, because you've consented to being a part of this. So go ahead and check that out in case you're interested. There's webinars on there from everything from curricular integration of MWEEs to using NOAA data in MWEEs, all sorts of really fun and interesting pieces up there. We're going to have time for Q&A at the end of this session. So I know sometimes questions pop into people's head right when, Anne might be saying something. Feel free to type it in the chat and we'll be sure to pitch it to her at the end. And like I said, we'll cut the video at the end so that you can actually come on and we'll engage in a full conversation with Anne because she's going to be presenting about a pretty unique kind of aspect of education today that connects really well over to MWEEs. I would be remiss if I didn't share that the BWET funding opportunity is open right now that funds MWEEs. I'm dropping that link into the chat as well for you can find the NOFO linked on that page as well as my email address in case you want to reach out and have any questions about that. And with that, I think that's all the logistics that we need to cover. I hope you all will welcome me in welcoming Ann Peterson, Dr. Ann Peterson. She is the new director of STEM at the Virginia Department of Education, among other titles that she holds as well. I'm excited for Ann to be speaking with us today because she thinks a lot about not just how do we make MWEEs easier for teachers, easier for them to be integrated into the classroom, but also how do we make MWEEs most sustainable. And yesterday there was a session that VDOI hosted on local alternative assessments, and we heard her colleague Holly Cook talk about performance assessments and how they can be both instruction and assessment. And I think that's a really powerful way of framing what we're going to get into today. So I won't take any more of her thunder. I'm going to turn it right over to Ann.
Well, thank you very much, Elise, and I so appreciate the relationship we have with our non-formal educators. And there was a big discussion, what do we call non-formal educators, informal educators? Gurus of all that is good outside, let's just call you that. So I want to thank you for your commitment to environmental education. We are in a time when there's a lot going on in education, and support of stakeholders such as yourself is always critical. This year, or this coming up year in 2024 and 2025, you will have two sets of standards roll out for full implementation. That's mathematics and language arts. Typically, there is a year to allow divisions to be able to crosswalk between the old standards and the new. But with our current administration, they want best practices in education in place, and they have accelerated that timeline. In the following year, 25-26, the educators will face three different new sets of standards coming out, in where the new science standards, the 2025 science standards, the 2024 computer science standards, and the history and social studies standards will be rolled out. And when we think of those poor educators, particularly those in elementary school, that's 5 whole new sets of standards in a period of 2 years. On top of that, there are so many other initiatives that come down and affect teachers that basically a lot of people are just feeling overwhelmed. School divisions are lacking in school bus drivers, as you probably know already. Transportation is getting an issue to be able to go to different sites. And they're lacking in the number of available teachers, fully certified teachers, lacking in subs. And that, with the additional pressures, means that any supports we can have from people with expertise is always appreciated. So that being said, when you reach out to people and when you reach out to divisions, because there's a limited amount of time and so much going on, it's always good to take opportunity to support different mandates that are expected to be in place to make less work, or couple in or provide structures to enable them to do current initiatives a little bit easier. And one such way to do that is through the use of performance assessments. I love performance assessments. Josh has worked with me and he knows this. Performance assessments are what we call doing the leaves in science. And if you have ever looked at the 2018 Science Standards of Learning, and in particular the curriculum framework, you'll notice there are leaves where students are to be engaged with science. Students are to have ownership in their learning. And with the environmental standards infused K through biology, it's a perfect opportunity for students to do that hands-on application in the school grounds, in the community around them, through looking at and interacting with their environment. So performance assessments are infused and encouraged throughout as students demonstrate mastery of their understanding of the science concepts. But there is actually in code an expectation that they're done in third grade. And that's part of the local alternative assessment program. Back in the day, probably about 7, 8 years ago, there used to be a third grade SOL test in science. And what was happening was these poor kiddos were being over tested in third grade. Well, there's arguments that are being over tested overall, but that's a whole nother story. As a result, the General Assembly said, let's move back and let's not give assessments unless they're mandated by the federal government. Well, the federal government mandates 3 SOL tests in science, or state-based assessments in science, one in elementary, one in middle school, and one in high school. In Virginia, there were 2 tests administered at the elementary level. There was one in third grade, and there was one in fifth grade, and the one in fifth grade covered fourth and fifth grade content. There was one test in middle school, which covered the sixth, seventh, and eighth grade content, and there were 3 tests in high school. When the General Assembly decided to move back to only meeting the 3 required by the federal government, the General Assembly and Dr. Lane, who was state superintendent at the time, chose the fourth and fifth grade test to stay, that combined test. He chose the middle school test to stay because there was no other. And then he chose the biology SOL test to remain. And the rationale behind that was the most number of kids, the course that the most number of kids take in high school was actually biology. So when they moved away from doing that assessment in third grade, there had to be something in place based on our General Assembly. And I'm very happy for that. We are required to have a local alternative assessment, or a minimum of 1 performance assessment in third grade. There is an accountability measure in that the divisions on a 5-year cycle are expected to submit, what are you teaching? What assessments are you given? They are to provide sample or examples of the performance assessments. They have to submit evidence of student work. So they have to submit what the samplers of what the students submitted and how they were scored. So I just actually this morning notified the divisions who were up for this process this year. So all divisions have to do it. There is a layer of accountability there. And as again, the environment is a great place to take advantage of our wonderful outdoor experiences, get kids outside, get them working and doing field experiences and engaging in student actions that can lead to the evidence needed to show that that performance assessment expectation was met. I wish we had them at every grade level as a requirement. Some of you may know at times it gets to be a struggle to have science taught at the elementary level. I think nationally in grades K through 5, the average time allocated to science instruction is 19 minutes per day. And when I say average time, that means most of it is going to be taught during those tested year. And there are definitely gaps in the amount of science kids are exposed to in the elementary levels. So what I'm going to share with you is an example of a performance assessment that was made specifically for third grade and is specifically to meet that performance assessment requirement. And so the key thing is whenever you do anything with schools and to get your foot in the door is you have to make sure they're aligned to the standards. So in this case, the lesson topic is the impacts of natural events. Oh my goodness, I have a typo on the first page. And humans' influence on ecosystems. And this is like the third time I've presented, so this is sad that I'm just recognizing this. Um, uh, Again, this is third grade, and we indicate the standards. If you cannot indicate how the standards are being met, many principals will not see that it is an effective use of instructional time. So in this case, we had standard 3.H, which is the students will investigate and understand natural events and humans influence ecosystems. In the standards currently, there are bullets underneath that kind of provide the guardrails for the content. We are going to talk in a few minutes about the science revision process, and you will find that the structure of the standards are expected to change. There is also potential to hit standard 3.5. So anytime we can blend standards, it's almost like science is composed of systems. Who would have thought? But there's relationships anywhere, and anytime we can um, make sure we reinforce that with student, it's great. If we can tie into mathematics or language arts, we get a lot more bang for our buck. Mathematics and language arts have a much higher level of expectations in terms of accountability. So a lot of divisions are almost fearful of these two areas, and a significant amount of time is spent in these two subject areas. So showing how those connections can be made explicit is always preferable. As you go down, we describe some of the different skills that students will engage in, and we also reinforce the scientific engineering practices. So these are like the touchstone of science education. So although we learn about all sorts of environmental concepts as well as other concepts throughout the academic year, the whole time the students should be asking questions and defining problems. They should be planning and carrying out investigations. They should play a role in interpreting, analyzing, and evaluating data, constructing and critiquing explanations and conclusions, and communicating information. A MWEE is a perfect platform for this opportunity. As students go out in the schoolyard and investigate and look at local phenomena, they start to generate their own questions about the environment. Once they start thinking about, well, I wonder about this, I wonder about this, as they start to generate those, the teacher can, or the you as educators can start shaping, how can we investigate this? Ask those questions and facilitate them as they think through and think about investigations. You can introduce different tools to use. Water, if you have water on the grounds, water testing kits. You can show them how to use different tools and then allow them to use those tools to investigate what question they have. In science, we want to use data to make informed decisions. And wouldn't that be nice about general society? Um, but realistic, and that's a whole sidebar conversation, but being able to collect their own data, to be able to use those skills they learned in math, to be able to interpret, analyze, develop graphs, be able to use that data is critical. And then they construct their own conclusions. And with a MWEE, they apply that understanding to a novel situation as they do their action project. So the performance assessment, one thing we want to, this isn't a sample, and Elise, I believe you have it, and we'll share it with anybody who wants it with actually the correct spelling in the title. Um, uh, Regardless of whether you do this one or shape or revise it, we want to make sure that the challenge or the action project is in student-friendly language. So after conducting the school grounds audit, you realize both humans and natural events impact your schools. Um, Your task is to propose a solution or design a device that will reduce the impact of a human activity or natural event on your school grounds. And it provides the different criteria. Now, there's a written part, and there's all sorts of things that the students will make as a product, but there's also a lot of experiences that they have to get there, and that's where you really come in. Now, where that written description and the proposed solution and the data, that's going to be part of the evidence that the division submits to show that they met that accountability measure. So in this, one mandate of the General Assembly is that we have a common rubric, and I will show you what that looks like. But we've also prepared this lesson so that you, as a non-formal educator, and then Elise, after our discussion yesterday with our Virginia Environmental Network, now I don't know what to call everybody, so we'll just call you gurus of the environment. You, as a guru of the environment, can use this as a tool, but also the teacher can use it as a tool. So maybe part is done with the teacher, part is done with the local guru. It tells you exactly what you need to do to plan and to consider before you've implemented the lab or the activities. During, it gives some support for the teachers on things to ask and things to consider. And then it gives an anticipated timeline with also a focus on careers, because we are also going to hit that workplace readiness. And I'm scrolling through quickly. This is actually a reading test. No, only kidding. And I have to admit, I'm used to people who interact, so you guys are awfully quiet. I'm going to take you to the timeline that we constructed. So this is the actual student-facing document, calling all students after conducting the school grounds audits. So it is worksheets, and they can choose one of 4 focus areas, because if we leave it too open, it's really hard. It provides areas for them to provide their evidence and their solution. There is a schoolyard observation tool. There, you all have done schoolroom or school ground report cards. That's a little bit too involved for a 3rd grader who is probably about 8 years old and may be on different reading levels. So we wanted to provide structures to allow them to have the reading plus also the visual image for those that are English learners or for those with low reading ability. And there are discussion questions and tools, but I think the most powerful part is this part. This is where you all come in, and if you have other ideas, I think it would be great if you shared them with me. So this is a sample way that this can roll out, and this is a sample way that the teacher and the environmental guru can work together to come up with a plan that will allow students to have a full fleshed out unit to address these concepts. So the essential question, one thing we like to do is to have an essential question that leads each day or each lesson. And in this one, what is the habitat like in our schoolyard? So it's written in language that is accessible to students. In that second column, this is the expectations of students to be able to demonstrate mastery. So one thing, students are to observe water use in the school setting and identify possible water conservation solutions. That is an expectation of the standards. So this is something that can be built into the lesson. They're to observe and provide evidence of soil erosion around the schoolyard or community and create and implement a plan to reduce erosions. So these are things that they can walk around, do the school observation tool and make those observations. Observe the water use in the school setting, observe and provide evidence of soil and erosion. All of that can be done while they're doing their schoolyard observation tool. On day 2, they could answer the essential question, what does our classroom data tell us about our schoolyard habitat? And while they're doing that, they're analyzing the effects of human influences as well as natural influences on the organisms and the habitats. And so they are taking that schoolyard report card and really doing that jump into analyzing the data. We give prompts for this is what classroom discussion could look like. And we also, in the last column, provided those mathematics and language arts standards that align. In this column here, which is 1, 2, 3, the fourth column, provide information on what tools are needed. When we get down to the next one, if you have time on day 3, let's go back and review. And I think for me, I think a point of frustration is at times teachers talk and teach in silos. This is the soil week. And then we're going to do social studies next. And then we're going to come back and we're going to do um, uh, simple machines. And then we're going to do some more. And then we're going to do this. And there's no connections made. So any opportunity we have to go back to prior concepts is always preferable. So this is a good time to talk about living and non-living components. Now be careful. 3rd grade, we don't introduce terms biotic and abiotic. I am sure you could if you wanted to and if you had an accelerated group. But the really big thing is, what are the living things? And that's hard. That's confusing. In fact, I had a question today. Is a shell considered biotic or abiotic? As long as it was once living or generated by a living organism, it's considered living or biotic. You can do, and I know many of you have done these before, quadrats with the students and have them make observations of what's in that specific area in the schoolyard. You can have them all share what they saw and use a group of class data and then start analyzing things. Why do you think this area over here doesn't have the number of organisms or doesn't have the variety of biotic fact or living factors that's this area over here did? And that could be starting the discussion of what could be an action project later on. As you scroll down, again, it gives you discussion points. You could apply a little math and determine the area. On day 4, we're going to focus on water. How is water in our school and schoolyard impacted by environmental and human activities? So tie it back. We did that schoolyard audit a few days ago. Let's talk about that and let's brainstorm ways to reduce water use in the building and on the school grounds and make some challenges. How many ways can your group identify? And there's all sorts of things to point out that teachers could do. This is kind of this isn't an everyday lesson plan, but kind of more of a overall structure for a unit. And it pinpoints exactly, again, what's in the standards. Now notice some of these have leaves next to them, and that is because that is where the kids are engaging in a scientific and engineering practice. So you will see those throughout. Now, for those of you, and well, both Eric and Josh, who are on this call, can tell you, yes, this is going to take several days, but you're hitting a lot of standards and a lot of expectations, and that's a good thing. The next day you can focus on soil. Again, we're covering another standard, opportunity to review. We have several essential questions that will lead the work. And then we will eventually, this is a bit of a long unit, filling in the gaps, extending your thinking beyond the schoolyard. How is what we observed in our schoolyard like habitats in our community or in our state? It's an opportunity to reach out and really think about a broader state, a broader area across Virginia. Let me see. Excuse me. In the last section, I think the part of a MWEE that is often left out is that action project. And so for this case, when this division submits what they've done in terms of a performance assessment, this is the part that will be submitted. This is the part that is evidence that the students understand and are able to apply those standards. So those experiences are critical. You can't just have kids propose a solution or design a device that will reduce the impact of human activity or a natural event if they don't have any experience with it, they haven't had those wonderful observation opportunities, if they haven't done those explorations and those deep dives that were in the prior lessons. So this is the performance assessment that we made for our environmental gurus and our educators. And I'm going to pause there before we jump on to the science standards. What questions do you have?
And I can pitch one that's coming out of the chat. If folks want to put their questions into the chat for now, that would be great. And then we can, after you covered I think you had another update after this, we can do a full kind of discussion. But Tara is asking, or many people actually are asking about the tool and where they can access it. Is it published anywhere on the VDOE site at this point, or is that something we want to make an effort to get it up on Bay Backpack or something like that?
I can check if it's on the website. One of my colleagues is supposed to be updating things, and I do not think it's up there, but I will make sure it's up there by the end of today. And Elise, I just noticed I have to send you a different version. I'll send it to you today so that you can publish in Bay Backpack or wherever you want.
Awesome. And Meredith is asking, would this be appropriate to co-teach between a math and a language arts teacher?
Yes, it could be very appropriate to co-teach. It depends, and I'm gonna do a little bit of I have always found that as a science teacher, they will let me co-teach their area, and sometimes it's hard to push into math or ELA because they have such structured and times, and they have sometimes the different level of administrative oversight than other areas, but I would definitely, Meredith, suggest co-teaching it between math and language arts. Or a lot of times you'll have a 3-hour block for language arts and you only have 20 minutes, 30 minutes allocated to science. You can do some of the robust hands-on experiences during the science time and then go back and do some of the writing during the language arts time. You can collect the data during your science time and then go back and use that data. So really it's like a partnership. Co-teaching would be great, but perhaps a partnership. If you are teaching at the elementary level, a lot of times it's going to be the same teacher anyway. So it's really talking to them about, just because this is a performance assessment in science doesn't mean you have to only do it during science time. Here are some opportunities that you can utilize times in other courses to be able to get it.
Another question. So, for the majority of our states, we have more than just Virginia folks represented here. Um, who is typically designing these performance assessments? Is this are teachers doing it, or is it more the next level up? Is it somebody who is maybe overseeing science or overseeing another subject area that is supporting their teachers in designing these? And how do non-formal educators learn about these particular opportunities? I mean, you're mentioning third grade is obviously a prime time for this. How do they kind of know where to plug in?
So yeah, I was going to say yes, all the levels design. So first of all, for those that are outside of Virginia, welcome to Virginia. You should consider moving here. It's a great state. Um, some divisions have whole teams that can make up these resources and can develop supports for students. Some don't even have anybody dedicated to science instruction and maybe only have one person dedicated to instruction for the whole state. So we do have exemplars on the VDOE site, and we actually have one for MWEE in 6th grade as well on the DOE site. You can get those, but there are also some in our resource Go Open VA, and I could put that in the chat. It's a repository similar to Bay Backpack, where you can get all sorts of resources. They aren't vetted though, so you never know. It depends on the division and where they want to use resources. Can non-formal educators or environmental gurus write these? Of course. We just ask that, make sure they're aligned to the standards, make sure that it's explicit. And I think the hardest part of an educator, or a hardest part in education, is really being thoughtful of, how will I know what student mastery looks like? because a lot of time as educators, even we don't think about that. So if they are understanding that soils are made of different components and being able to identify those, what should students be able to do at the end and then work your way to there? But we appreciate any and all help. If you have different resources, I've worked with Susie Gilly for years and many of our non-formal educators, and there's some great lessons out there that you can just look at and say, how can I revise them to fit the standards, and just go from there. It doesn't have to be in this format. What else?
I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. I'm seeing that Nancy's offering to share out a schoolyard report card for third through fifth grade. And I think the rest of these are comments. So we can move on. And if folks have more questions, feel free to pop them in. And like I said, we'll have time to all come off mute and do a full discussion in a little bit here.
Well, and I think it's really funny because I think Nat Draper has a schoolyard for third to fifth. That's the one that we created for this because he is on our Virginia Environmental Network and we collaborated to form this. So, oh, it may be the same one, but that's great. Yeah, yeah. We when we rolled out Virginia Environmental Network, the first hub, this was the product of this because we got our environmental gurus together and we got our our formal educators together and said, how can we work together as a community? And we figured the only way to get people there and to have a carrot was to make a structure like this. And this performance assessment that I just showed you is the result of that collaboration prior. So, and I'm more than happy to share it with anybody, Nancy. Okay, I am going to, if it's okay with you all, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and tell you about the standards revision. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. As I said, Elise, I'm not used to people being muted. Okay. So this was actually a presentation to Virginia Association of Science Teachers, but it does give you a view of what is going on in Virginia. And I apologize for all of you not in Virginia, so I'm going to bore you senseless for the next couple minutes. In Virginia, we currently have the 2018 standards, which covers the expectations in science for kindergarten through physics. So we have 13 courses with standards of learning, and those standards of learning indicate what the scientific and engineering practices and what the concepts students are to cover in K through physics. And we are very fortunate in Virginia. Our environmental gurus actually sat with us towards the end of throughout the process. And we said, okay, this is how we're going to grow the different concepts. Environmental concepts are interwoven throughout, and this is how we're developing. So the concepts are both vertically aligned and are cognitively appropriate at each grade level. One question that we constantly get is, why aren't you introducing climate change in early grade levels? Climate change is complex. Most adults don't understand it, but we can provide that foundation so that when we get to climate change, we really start to get kids involved with that in sixth grade, they have that foundation to enable them to understand and also look at that complex, the numbers, the quantitative data in a way that is meaningful. So we have those 13 courses, but we also had 11 courses that students could use towards graduation credit that had no standards. They had nothing. So that means any division can teach what they wanted, which you'd think would be a good thing. However, there got to be several obstacles. First of all, how can we ensure that the kids in Galax, Virginia, are experiencing the same content, the same level of rigor, the same level of understanding as the students in Fairfax, Virginia, as the students in Virginia Beach? So that was a problem. And I can say just from personal experience, I had my youngest was taught anatomy through watching House. And I don't think that was a rigorous way and a good effective use of time. Another problem we have is right now we are in a place where we have teachers that are not certified. They have provisional certification, there are long-term subs, and they need some sort of structure to be able to teach those kiddos. So we are or have just recently finished the process of forming standards for those 11 courses that don't have standards. And actually, Elise is a critical part of that process as she's on our Science Education Advisory Board. And some of those courses include environmental science, include ecology, anatomy and phys, astronomy, um, chemistry 2, physics 2, earth science 2. There's 11 of them, geology. And so those are intended to meet the national descriptions for the course. There are actually national descriptions set, but also to really have those integrated scientific and engineering practices and take a deeper dive into those content for those level 2 courses. We are just starting year 2, and that is for the revision of the current standards. Now, I know a lot of the people from Virginia have experience with those, and towards the end, I'm going to give you a QR code so you can offer your advice on how we could make these standards better and the best in class for Virginia. It is anticipated that these standards go to the board for initial review in October and will go to the board for final review in January. Between now and then, there are going to be multiple points for public feedback, including today. And you will get a QR code so you can provide feedback if you'd like. We will also be hosting public hearings in April and May. And once the standards go to the board for initial review to make sure that we get the feedback and we appropriately modify or adjust those standards to reflect what is scientifically accurate. That is what we hold and value. Also, to make sure it prepares our kids for either higher education or for the workforce, or just to be able to make informed decisions about their world. In January through June 2025 is the crosswalk. So that means the teachers can start integrating some of the new content and divisions if they choose to do so. And then we have full implementation in 25, 26. I will say that there's a high level of concern. This is an accelerated timeline, but the governor felt that he wanted to make sure that those standards were in place, that every kid deserved best in class standards. So he indicated these standards were to be accelerated. So the format is going to change a little bit. I was showing you the 3rd grade standards earlier and said how you had those letters below that provided the guardrails or the parameters for the content to be taught. We are now embedding those scientific and engineering practices. So each one is going to start with a verb. We're going to plan and conduct an investigation on water and describes how each of those properties of water impact life processes. Macromolecules, instead of saying macromolecules have role, we're going to have them plan and conduct an investigation to differentiate the 4 categories of macromolecules through their primary roles and functions. So you look at a higher level of ownership. We are taking what has historically been in the curriculum framework, infusing it into the standard to emphasize that students should be doing science and should not be. I just read something yesterday about having kids learn about clouds by looking at pictures of clouds. I was like, what? Why don't they just go outside and make observations? I don't understand. So, this is the direction that we're going with Virginia. And I have to admit, I apologize. My phone is going berserk next to me. The process, again, December, January, we're going to have the new timeline coming out. It is posted on the website now. In February, we're going to open it for the application window for revision committees. It has to be formal educators. So we will ask our environmental gurus, and I think there's our environmental gurus to be involved in the process. But at this point, we can only have formal educators. We will have public comment. Sorry, I don't know what's going on. Is presenting. Okay. Uh, we'll have I'm sorry, the public comment, and then we'll have the meetings in May with the steering committees. We have to have the draft SOLs to the board leadership by September for all 24 courses. And then, as I said, the final review in January. So if you look on the QR code and if you hover over the QR code on the left, you can use this to get to a form that will allow you to give feedback on the current standards. But better yet, I am going to follow this up with an email to Elise, and I will give I can give a link to allow people to look at those 11 developed courses. I can give you a link to provide feedback on those 11 and also to give feedback on the current 2018 standards. So that will be all shared with you at the conclusion of the meeting and hopefully by tomorrow morning at the latest. I will say that we have to be careful. We do have a very conservative administration. We have some very conservative viewpoints in Virginia. And I think it'll be a careful dance between advocacy and pushing people forward in their understanding. So if we push too hard, things could get chopped. So we're going to be very careful about language because what we want is we want to get that strong evidence. We want those concepts out there. We want evidence out there. We want to give people the skills to make informed decisions. But if we cross over to advocacy too much, it could actually backfire on us. So it's a it's a struggle that we have to go through. And that being said, that is it for me. What other questions do you have?
Thank you so much, Anne. I'm going to stop the recording if I can find the button on my computer.